We're ready to go, Mr. Mayor.
Ready to start, Richard?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this online meeting of Colchester Borough Council on the 1st of February 2021. I'm Councillor Robert Davidson, Mayor of the Borough of Colchester, and I'm chairing the meeting tonight. This meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet and on the Council's YouTube channel, where it will also be available to watch afterwards. I want to confirm that all of us present in the room where I am are adhering to the latest government guidance. I can assure those watching that the meeting room is set up to meet the COVID secure social distancing requirements. Whilst we are not wearing masks while seated, these will be worn if and when we leave our seats. We have undertaken the risk assessment for this meeting. To begin, there are a few matters of housekeeping. Would all participants please mute their microphones unless they are invited to speak? Could participants indicate to speak by using the raise hands facility? The vote tonight will be administered by a roll call of councillors by Mr. Andrew Weavers, and we will look forward to having a break after approximately 90 minutes and every 90 minutes subsequently. I'd now like to invite my chaplain, the Reverend Dr. Amanda Elms, to say prayers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening to everyone. So let us pray. As we meet together this evening to consider Section 1 of the local plan, we give you thanks for giving us gifts and skills which we may use in the service of this great borough. Please guide us through your Holy Spirit so that wise and informed decisions are made this evening. Help us to discuss the issues before us with courtesy, truth, and mutual respect, and grant that all who are representative of this community and people will seek to serve the common good through him who came not to be served, but to serve, Jesus Christ our Lord. Especially during this time of pandemic, we give thanks for the vaccine which we now have and is being rolled out at this time in our borough. At the same time, we remember and pray for all those who have been affected adversely, both financially and physically, for those whose livelihoods have come to an end, and those who are vulnerable physically, mentally, and emotionally. We particularly remember Alderman Terry Sutton and all those through the COVID-19, or other reasons, have died during the past year, giving thanks for their lives and having compassion on their families. May they all receive the support that they need at this time. We give thanks for our Mayor, Councillor Robert Davidson, and for all the members of this council. Please bless them in all that they do in and for this borough. Amen.
Amen.
And may we join together in the prayer Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom come,
Thy kingdom come.
thy will be
Thy
done
will be
on earth as it
done
is.
as it is in heaven.
Give us this
Give us
day
this
our
day
daily,
our daily bread.
and forgive us our trespasses
Trespass
as we forgive
as we
those who
forgive those
trespass,
that trespass against us.
and lead us not into
Lead us not
temptation,
into temptation.
but deliver us from evil.
Yes,
For thine is the kingdom,
the kingdom
the power, and the glory,
and the glory
forever and ever.
forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And as you've said earlier, we ought to have a minute's silence in memory of Alderman Terry Sutton, who passed away on the 22nd of January. As you know, as we all know, he was mayor in 2005-06 and was appointed an alderman in 2014 after 24 years of service. Our thoughts are with his family. He is actually the fourth alderman that has died during this COVID epidemic. So I'd like to have a minute's silence from now. Thank you. Thank you very much, councillors. Right, we'll now move on to the meeting. I've had apologies from Councillor Philip Oxford. Are there any other apologies? No? Okay.
No, Chairman.
Declarations of interest. Could I invite anybody that has any interest on the item on the agenda to declare it now?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. It's Councillor Kevin Bentley. Can I just declare, I don't know if I need to, but I will do on the basis that Essex County Council is a major consultee and partner in this piece of work, that I'm an Essex County Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Jowers, your hand is up.
Ditto, Mr. Mayor, exactly the same one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any further ones? No? Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to have our say. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lissamore.
So just as a member of Essex County Council.
Okay, thank you very much. We now, and now Councillor Dave Harris, who may also be a county councillor.
I am, Mr. Mayor, but I think the officers know who the county councillors are. Perhaps we could list all of them, and that will save time.
Thank you very much. Right, and Councillor Tim Young.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just think, can Mr. Weavers just rule that I don't think Essex County councillors have to declare, but if we get a ruling on that, that will save the others having to do it. Thank you.
I will ask Mr. Weavers. Sorry, do count. Councillor Young, Deputy Mayor, you're absolutely correct. County councillors don't have to declare, but I do believe Councillor Bentley, who's heavily involved in the local plan at county level, probably does have to or ought to.
Correction, Mr. Mayor, I wasn't heavily involved. A member of the county council. I was not involved in this plan.
I don't know where I got that impression from then. I apologise. Good. Councillor David King, next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I ought to just acknowledge, and it's widely known, that I am the administration's lead representative on the TCP Garden Committee alongside my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Julie Young.
You might for something or other, Mr. Mayor. So similarly to David, I sit on the Tendring Garden community, a border working group or group that we sit on.
Right, thank you very much. And I believe that's all that's all the declarations of interest. Thank you. Under Have Your Say tonight, we have 3 speakers and 2 submissions, which Mr. Clifford will read out for us. So the first speaker we have tonight is Mr. Bill Marshall. Mr. Marshall, if you'd like to speak for up to 3 minutes. A bell will sound after 2 and again on the 3rd minute. Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, you're still muted.
Thank you very much. I was muted by one of your colleagues.
Oh.
Yes.
Powerful people.
They are, indeed. Anyway, thank you very much for letting me speak tonight. And I'd like to make a point that this is a shared Section 1 local plan for adoption, and not just a Section 1 local plan. My questions are, how can Colchester Borough Council councillors be certain that Tendring District Council councillors will fully share any benefits of the garden community once the shared Section 1 local plan is adopted? Question 2, how can Colchester Borough Council protect the interests of its 195,000 residents from the escalating costs of the proposed link road and rapid transport system after Essex County Council revised the HIFT with the GDA. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Marshall. After the 5 submissions, I will ask Councillor Julie Young, who's the portfolio holder with responsibility for the local plan, to respond to all 5. Thank you. So the next speaker is Jane Black from the Wivenhoe Society.
Good evening. Now, the Wivenhoe Society regrets the inclusion of the proposed garden community, but if it is decided to adopt the proposal, then the identity of existing communities must be protected. Now, map 10.2 in the consultation on modifications included a text box which had said, nota bene, the broad location includes areas which will act as landscape buffers between the garden community and surrounding settlements to provide adequate separation and to ensure that the identity of existing communities are maintained. Now, this text box has been dropped from the map that's included in the plan that came to you this evening. And we'd very much like it to be reinstated because the preservation of settlement identity is an extremely important issue and it should be emphasised in the local plan. The second point relates to the rapid transit route, where it says that the development plan document will include details of the design and delivery of Route 1, the rapid transit. Now, is this going to include the route that runs from the garden community into the centre of Colchester? Will this be decided as part of the PD and not just be decided by Essex County Council? Because we need to consult on this adequately. The third point relates to community infrastructure. Now, in policy SP8, there's a statement about primary healthcare capacity, in which it suggested that primary healthcare capacity could be obtained by relocating existing surgeries. Now, this would be very hard luck on those communities that lost their existing medical facilities, and certainly the people of Wivenhoe would not be pleased if their medical centre was moved up to provide for the new community. The fourth point is about the wording of the plan itself, which I think needs a bit of tidying up because you have not managed to expunge all references to the 2 garden communities which have been dropped. Paragraphs 3.3 and 3.4 are particularly bad on this point, where it's suggesting there'll be a garden community near to Braintree, and there'll be one to the west of Colchester. So could I suggest a bit of more proofreading of the plan before it's finally adopted?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jane Black. And the third submission, we've got Andrew Wilkinson from Enform. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. I'm just going to read a prepared statement. As you may be aware, Enform and its community group, EcoCulture, run a series of community panels. Several of the panels have asked us to raise several issues that affect the local development. We have not had the time to investigate all the issues raised at the current time, but feel they should be raised in this local plan meeting as it affects the Culture and Tendering Board's Garden Village proposal. Number 1, most of the development appears to be in tendering districts, so what does that have in reducing the housing allocations for Colchester? Number 2, Salary Brook is a much-loved nature reserve at the bottom of the valley with the proposed development above it. What effects such as pollution runoff, flood and drainage impact will occur? Number 3, East Anglia in the proposed development area, fertile arable farmland for the UK, Britain's breadbasket. One of the possible effects of Brexit is the need to produce more of our own food. What is the anticipated loss of food production? We believe as a local authority, we have a requirement to protect Grade A farmland. How much Grade A farmland will be lost under this development? Number 4, the main reason claimed for producing the local plan is to prevent speculative developments. As all these speculative developments will have to comply with planning regulations, what is the real risk? Number 5, there is concern that this is a rush and unnecessary extraordinary meeting, which many believe to be undemocratic and designed to prevent proper scrutiny and consultation. Why has this meeting been arranged at short notice? And why does part 1 of the local plan need to be approved now? Number 6, during the plan period 2013 to 2033, housing needs are set at 18,400 or 920 per year. How many homes have currently been built since 2013 and how many are still required to be built till 2033? Number 7, according to the housing delivery test since 2001, Colchester's built 1,448 homes above target. Number 8, according to Brownfield Site Register, 1,439 homes have been identified. How many homes have not yet been built but have received planning permission? Are the identified windfall sites, 510 to 836, included in the housing needs requirement? Number 9, we're currently living in rapidly changing times where housing needs will change dramatically because of Brexit through reduced immigration. The decline of shops in the high street, potentially releasing buildings and sites for housing in the town centre. The trend to work from home, which has increased due to COVID, causing many companies to consider reducing office space, which can be used for housing. What research has been done to see how many homes could be provided by these factors? Whilst there are major concerns for rejecting, for all these reasons, we feel part 1 of our local plan needs to be rejected at this stage whilst the consequences are examined and implications are updated in the like of circumstances. That's me finished. Sorry if I had to read too fast.
No, thank you very much. What I would say, there's a lot of detailed questions in there, and it may be that you get a written answer for some of them. Because
I think that'd be acceptable for our group.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Clifford, we've got 2 submitted written submissions. Which one are you doing first?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start with Keith Boddington's submission. And this reads as follows. The planning inspector has found the North Essex Authority shared Section 1 local plan 2013 to 2033 conditionally sound, with the tendering Colchester Border Garden community being dependent on the Government Homes England £99 million Homes Infrastructure Funding request awarded to Essex County Council, who have subsequently majorly modified the HIF with their December 2020 grant termination agreement to Homes England. 1. If you look at the title of this item presented to the committee, it is noticeable that shared is omitted. Councillor Stark, OBE, has in the past labelled CBC as untrustworthy, and TDCC councillors have stated that most of the land of TCBGC is within tendering. Will the tendering Colchester Border Gardens community be shared equally? Both CBC and TDC officers have stated that the housing allocations of the TCGBC can be met within their SHLAs. Why are CBC, TDC and ECC hell-bent on building on 600 plus hectares of Grade 1 agricultural land and destroying the countryside when existing housing stock and infrastructure in and around Colchester need urgent and unnecessary improvements? Would you like me to move on to the submission from Pat Marsden, Chairman?
Yes, please, Mr. Clifford.
The first thing I would like to say is that I'm astonished this meeting is being held at such short notice. It seems undemocratic and gives the impression that adoption of the local plan has been rushed through without giving people a chance to comment or contribute while the country is distracted by the pandemic. 2, the second thing I would like to add is that I'm equally astonished by the fact that no mention has been made of the pandemic and how this might affect the local plan. We are experiencing a crisis in which hundreds of thousands of people are dying, resulting in a decrease of population, the loss of jobs, increasing unemployment, the loss of homes being unable to pay the mortgage or being evicted by landlords because they cannot pay the rent, increasing homelessness, increasing poverty and possible shortfalls in government funding, etc. A, with regard to this, why is there no reference to social housing and low-rent homes in the plan rather than the vague government redefinition of affordable homes, which we all know means homes to buy? Social housing and low-rent homes are going to be vital as the country tries to recover from the devastating effects of the pandemic. In my view, the adoption of the plan should be paused to take into consideration the more urgent requirements of the aftermath of the pandemic. 3, with regard to the agenda documents themselves, there are a number of smaller issues. A, the available maps are confusing. The one showing the site of Garden Community is demonstrated by a crude red blob north of the A133. B, the broad map is almost unreadable with its pale background and a crude line showing the boundary of the Garden Community spilling out to the south of the A133. something which has always been a contentious issue for Wivenhoe, especially with its vague use expressed as unspecified university expansion or an unclear and ridiculous park and tube site. C, since the early 1960s, the historic town of Wivenhoe has had close links with the university, but in the local plan this has been forgotten and Wivenhoe has been sidelined. Its status has been reduced to that of a secondary settlement, and you even described it as a village when it is a thriving town. D, finally, it is ironic that while you're extolling the virtues of the car-free aspect of the garden community, you are spending millions of pounds on a new link road whose only purpose is to service the garden community. And that's the end of the statement, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Clifford. We've now heard all 5 submissions. Councillor Julie Young, as the portfolio holder in charge of the local plan, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll address Andrew Wilkinson first, if I may, and say, given the nature of the questions that were asked, which were 9 in total, I will provide a written answer to those, which I think Mr. Wilkinson was happy to accept. So I'll move on to the first question that was posed by Bill Marshall. This talks about sharing the benefits. So governance arrangements will establish clear mechanisms for sharing benefits. Long-term stewardship is part of the garden community model. So ownership and maintenance of public spaces and community facilities will be secured over the long term. Then he went on to ask about the costs of the proposed link road, and he mentioned escalating costs. And we haven't actually seen any evidence of escalating costs. So, you know, that's the answer to that one. Moving on to the questions raised by Jane Black. The wider area includes land that will not be allowed to be built on, included in the plan area, should give more protection than excluding it. But consultation on the DPD will allow all views on where the boundaries should lie to be heard and considered before a decision is reached. Regarding the development of the link road, Essex County Council, as the highway authority, is responsible for delivering the RTS route, but they are working closely with Colchester and Tendring. Consultation on the RTS and link road options was undertaken by Essex County Council in November 2019. The councils are working closely with healthcare providers to expand delivery in a phased manner to benefit both existing and new residents. Joint working is included, planning to maximise the ways in which development can support healthy lifestyles, not just treat illness, but seek to prevent it in the first place. And Jane also talked about a tidying up exercise, so the references cited will be removed from the final adopted version of the plan. Moving to Keith Boddington, I think was next, Mr. Mayor. Yes, policy SP9 provides that both councils will be involved in delivering the garden community. In particular, the second paragraph provides that for the plan period up to 2033, housing delivery from the garden community, irrespective of its actual location, will be distributed equally between CBC and TDC. The second question, the plan provides that the garden community will deliver between 2,200 and 2,500 houses during the plan period. But importantly, the wider benefits of its development will help establish a sustainable location for future growth of Colchester and Tendring for many years to come, ensuring infrastructure is provided in a phased manner in tandem with growth. The garden community model provides for extensive amounts of green infrastructure, including capacity for food production and net increases in biodiversity. It also means that both authorities have fewer sites to find in future years. Moving on to Pat Marsden, and she was upset about the short notice of the meeting. Normal statutory procedures were met. Local Plan Committee on the 14th of December debated the issue and approved sending it to full council with 7 weeks notice. The plan was submitted in 2017, so can hardly be described as rushed through. It has been debated at length in several previous committees. The full impacts of the pandemic are not yet known, but the need for new housing will not go away. The government have also been clear. To that end, we will build, build, build. Build back better, build back greener, build back faster, and to do that at the pace that this moment requires. On the maps, the wider area includes land that will not be allowed to be built on. Including it in the plan area should give it more protection than excluding it. But consultation on the DPD will allow all views on where the boundaries should lie to be heard and considered before a decision is reached. We are required to use government policy on types of affordable homes needed. The NPPF provides the definition and includes both affordable and social homes for rent. Details of tenure have not been determined. Not approving a plan leaves the council open to ad hoc development. After 3.5 years, it can't be said the plan is being rushed through. The link road provides necessary access to the development, but is only one part of the sustainable transport package for the Garden community, which also includes the RTS and network of pedestrian and cycle paths. It won't only serve the Garden community, but will also provide a link to the A120 and A12, residents of Wivenhoe and Chundring, and provide access to the university. And I think, Mr. Mayor, that might be all of them. Remind me if I've not addressed any.
No, I think that's a fairly full answer. Thank you, Councillor Young. What I would ask is if you could forward your response to Mr. Wilkinson to all councillors as well, just for information. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask the speakers, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Wilkinson and Jane Black, to leave the meeting, please. You can follow the rest of the meeting on the YouTube channel, the Colchester Council's YouTube channel. Thank you very much for your attendance. They gone, Richard? Yeah. Okay. Right, councillors, I think they've left. So I would like to now recommendations from the Cabinet, panels and committees. Adoption of Section 1 of the local plan, as Councillor Young says, after 3.5 years before we started. I'd like to invite Councillor Barlow as Chair of the Local Plan Committee to move for up to 5 minutes. Motion A.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's taken us a long time to get to this point, but now we're here. And so I move that the recommendation contained in draft minute 205 of the Local Plan Committee meeting of 14th of December 2020 be approved and adopted. Making any local plan is a long and difficult process, and this one has been no exception. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who's been involved in the process. I won't try and list them all because I only have 5 minutes, but thousands of hours of work and effort have gone into this from residents, from officers and from councillors. And the document we're approving tonight is only a small part of that wider process. From the start, it's been unlike any other plan that we've made before, as we've been working across borders with our neighbours in Braintree and Tendring throughout this process. It's also been different because of the scope and ambition that's come from that approach, as we've attempted to plan across the whole of North Essex, not just for one borough or district. As we all know, that process has been a long and tricky one. There's been a number of hurdles along the way, and the plan we're proposing for adoption tonight is perhaps not the one envisioned way back in the midst of time when this all began. But that's the nature of plan making. It's always an iterative process where things change as circumstances change. And this plan has been drawn up in the midst of some huge changes locally, nationally, and globally. And this is only part one of the plan. We still have to go through a lot of this again for part two, the public examination for which looks as though it will be commencing in April. However, the key point to this local plan is that it recognises that North Essex is and will continue to be a growing area, and we should not be afraid to accept and celebrate that. People want to live, study and work here, businesses want to locate here, tourists want to visit here, and we should be proud of that. This plan is about recognising that reality and finding ways to manage that growth and to ensure that we have the infrastructure in place to take it so it does not overwhelm and damage that which already attracts people here. The key to this plan since the start of the process has been seeking to develop the infrastructure for growth first and providing a framework and guide for delivering it. However, it also recognises that the limitations that local authorities have in delivering infrastructure, where even three working together on a common plan cannot make everything we want appear. But by working together, we can set out a plan for growth that allows those who can make those decisions to see we are serious about that approach and committed to it. That's what this plan does. It shows that we are committed to that approach. And yes, this plan does commit us to a garden community, which I know we'll hear a lot more about during this evening's debate. That new community is a key part of the plan as it enables us to commit to proper infrastructure-led development to accommodate the growth we know is coming to North Essex. Yes, it's controversial and a different approach to planning and development. But as someone who grew up in a new town in another part of the country, I've seen that this approach works, and if this plan is approved tonight, I would appeal to everyone to work with us to make this new community work. This is not the end of the process for the local plan, for the garden community, and for all the developments going forward. There's lots more decisions to be made, and especially for the garden community through the DPD process, and there's lots more work to be done. And I would really encourage people to not see this as the end of the process. This is just one stopping point along the way. I know there are many parts of this plan that do not meet with universal agreement and approval, and I'm sure that even those of us who will support it and vote for it have elements that are not what we would want in an ideal world. But building a plan like this on this scale is about compromise and accepting that we all have to give way on something to ensure we can achieve something. And we've got to always remember that the alternative to this set of compromises is no compromise and no plan, no infrastructure and no limits, no controls on the development that we would be expected to take. I ask the Council to approve and adopt this local plan. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep. Thank you very much, Councillor Barlow. Am I correct in thinking that you have spoken on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. In that case, I'd like to ask Councillor Julie Young to speak on behalf of the Labour group, please.
Mr. Mayor, tonight we make one of the most important decisions that we will ever make, and it will influence the way our borough develops over the next 30 years. May I start by paying tribute to the fantastic planning team ably led by Ian and Karen, who produce outstanding work on our behalf. It's been a long, arduous process taking years. Great tombs of detail have been poured over by members of the cross-party local plan committee whose diligence and hard work have brought us to this moment tonight. We can pause for a moment, but then section 2 begins. It is innovative as we have worked with neighbouring authorities to bring this forward. Section 1 has had in-depth and ongoing democratic scrutiny. It is all the better for that democratic challenge. Engagement has been high and many groups and individuals have demonstrated their interest and responded accordingly. This has been a rigorous process which has led to a viable and sustainable plan. We are in the foothills of an ambitious plan. Build-out rates of garden community at 250 per year will mean housing will emerge slowly and not overnight as some might expect. We know that there are tough times ahead, and through our planning process, we need to ensure that development is done in accordance with the objectives of sustainable development, and that economic, social and environmental considerations are mutually supportive of each other. Jobs will be a key consideration. We need to build healthy, connected communities that put walking, cycling and sustainable travel at the heart of our developments. The Garden Community Plan presents us with that opportunity. We must design our homes with health at the core, using design to minimise energy and water needs. This plan addresses these considerations. We know that governance will be key, but we have a joint plan which benefits will be shared, including housing numbers. The plan makes much of sustainable travel commitments and that people should move between home, work and leisure in a different way. We have the chance to provide transport of strategic significance beyond the plan period and reduced reliance on the car. The 100 million HIF money makes that possible. If we are to persuade people to walk, cycle and bus more, these must be presented in a way that is preferable to the car. The existing planning system often leaves residents frustrated by the outcome. We have all seen sites in our areas which deliver little in the way of community benefits. Gladman developments spring to mind. Governance will be key. Government housing targets continue to concern residents. We can agree this plan tonight and keep housing delivery targets at 920, which are protected for 5 years. Alternatively, we can reject this plan and start again in numbers immediately jump to 1186 or maybe even 1612, a huge jump. Agreeing this plan tonight protects us. Rejecting this plan exposes us. Colchester continues to be a popular destination. We are uniquely positioned to provide access to the country and the coast. This plan delivers our best chance of delivering strategic growth. It's about channeling our higher selves, tearing metaphorical walls down and working together instead of protecting rigid boundaries that mean nothing to residents. Green buffers are naturally going to be important. We must deliver on our commitments to them. A new country park for Salary Brook is a must-have. Mr. Mayor, we have a unique opportunity to innovate with housing type and tenures, including social housing, but also housing such as co-housing. Good design will be key, and we know place has become more important over the past year as people feel more connected to their homes and locality. In conclusion, Mr. Mayor, this local plan gives us a chance to create healthy, active and sustainable communities. We must grasp this opportunity this presents. I urge residents to engage with the Tendring Colchester Borders development plans as we co-create new communities for the benefit of residents new and old. Mr. Mayor, I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Young. Councillors, I didn't make clear that I'd agreed earlier in the day that each of the political parties would have a spokesman for 5 minutes, and then it will be thrown open for all of the rest of you to speak for up to 3 minutes each. So we've had the Labour and Liberal one, so now it's Councillor Paul Dundas for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening to everybody. Well, here we are, really. 10 million quid of public money and quite a few wasted years. And we're back exactly where my group said we'd be nearly 5 years ago. But I'm not actually going to do a 5-minute I told you so. I'm sure my colleagues will point out some areas we've gone wrong. But we can't really pretend this process has been a success. A huge chunk of this Section 1 plan has been found unsound, just like we said it would. And it would actually be nice and go a long way if perhaps a few of the promoters of the original idea just said, sorry, you were right, we should have listened to you. We'll probably hear this evening that, or see mention the government and other local authorities, and we might hear a little bit of the excuse that sort of some big kids in the playground made me do it. I don't really agree with that. The responsibility for this process for Colchester lies with CBC and no one else. But we are where we are. I have doubts about the remaining parts of this Section 1, which is TCB. I've voiced those doubts in the past and I haven't changed my mind. I spoke at the examination and detailed my concerns about the TCB transport and the financial viability of actually being able to deliver the vision. However, I have to accept I had the opportunity to say my piece, and the inspector, although agreeing with us and others with the vast majority of our points, did find the tendering borders part of the plan sound. And I said, look, I said last year that whilst I do not have to agree with his decision, I have to respect it, and I remain committed to that. Now, I suspect were my group and I this evening minded to vote down this plan, we could assemble a coalition of votes in this chamber, which may very well succeed in doing so. If I genuinely believe doing so would give us a full reset and make everything all right again, that is what I would seek to do. But I don't believe it would. Our choice this evening is not this plan or another plan. It is this plan or no plan. And no matter how much you might not like this plan, no plan is almost certainly worse. It would see Colchester's house building target leap from around 900 to nearer 1,200 per year. It would be a free-for-all for speculative development and developers in general. It would see every corner of our borough swamped with planning applications we would have little defence against, a fair chunk of which, being selfish for a moment, would probably end up in my own ward of Stanway. It would see development of Middlewick even more likely and probably in even larger numbers. So however tempting it may be politically to vote it down, and no doubt be seen as the heroes against development, it would be a short and illusion of victory. It would see us lose control of planning altogether, and I suspect see most of TCB built anyway. We would be doing a grave disservice to our borough and our part of Essex. That isn't something I could do. This whole thing, I think, has got to the point it's too important for political games like that. Now, I've had the opportunity of seeing firsthand the early plans the three remaining North Essex authorities are putting in place, for which I do generally thank Councillors King and Jay Young. I attend and observe those meetings in genuine good faith. My simple challenge to everyone involved is prove me wrong. Prove me wrong about the rapid transport scheme. Prove me wrong and deliver a community which genuinely meets the high principles stated, including the 30% affordable housing. And actually, in fact, I will go further than challenging you to do so. I'll commit to do whatever I can in whatever capacity to prove myself wrong. If this is going to happen, we should all want it to be a success. I do wish I could fully endorse the Section 1 plan, but I struggle to do so. And my conscience is clear that my group and I have been totally consistent in what we've said and what we have done regarding it over a number of years. I am proud that us, Colchester Conservatives, almost the lone voice amongst political groups in Essex and the country, although there have been several other dedicated individuals and non-political groups, have won nearly all the arguments. Blocking it, however, I believe would achieve nothing at this stage. We need to move on and start to look at Section 2, which actually directly affects many of our residents even more. That, no doubt, will be a whole new debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dundas. Councillor Gerard Oxford on behalf of the Highwoods Independents.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everybody. I've been on the this local plan and preceding local plans, so I've been through a number of these processes over the years. This plan has taken over 3.5 years with lots of public consultation. So it isn't the fact that the public haven't had their chance to actually make their views known. The inspector has said that this garden community is sound. That's his ruling. Whether, you know, those of us who might disagree slightly with it or agree fully have to accept the fact that he's made that decision. To refuse this plan would mean that we would be subject to speculative development and a significant increase in our housing numbers. It could go up, as has already been said by Councillor Jay Young, as far as 1,610, which is a huge increase on the 920 we're already building to. So that would be a huge mistake in my view. In relation to the tendering Colchester Borders garden community, the rapid transit portion worries me most, in that along Remembrance Avenue, which is from the Hythe roundabout, the trees that were planted either side are of historical significance based on World War I. We wouldn't want to see any of them hacked back or lost in this process. The other thing I think would be quite important, because of the rapid transit route going from the proposed garden community, via the university and then into town, would it not be far more suitable to build student accommodation on that development so it has the shortest distance to go for their learning? And that's all I'm going to say, apart from the fact that I will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oxford. I have 11 other speakers at the moment, and we're starting off with Councillor Mike Hogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hopefully won't detain you too long, and I apologise for any repetition over what's already gone forward. First of all, I'd like to thank the chairman and portfolio holder, both past and present, and members and officers for preparing this document and bringing it in for us to discuss this evening. Whilst this part of the local plan brings in cross-border working, and I know that Tendering have agreed their local plan in the paper today, this, along with infrastructure, transport, health, education, etc., it also offers us a positive way to meet our housing needs for the future. All this set against the negativity of speculative development across the borough, and in my case, particularly in the Saints. Mr. Mayor, we already have developments sitting just outside our borders, namely Salary Brook slopes off of Bromley Road, Plains Farm off of Ipswich Road, both of which put pressure on our local services. And it's the nature of people to use our local services, even though they don't live in Colchester. And you can't blame them for that, it's human nature. Mr. Mayor, in agreeing this plan and a new garden community, this will help us in fighting the negativity of speculative development, particularly in my case in the Saints. And this will be on the only piece of open space we have, which is the land that stretches from Bullockwood right the way across the Fox Street Ardley, that already has an option on it by Persimmon Homes to build 700 extra homes in the area. Far better to agree a plan that provides infrastructure and a mix of homes for future years in a sustainable way with ready infrastructure. The inspector says that this is a sound and legal plan, and I agree with him. I shall be supporting the motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hogg. The next speaker is Councillor Luxford Vaughan.
Thank you. We were sold garden communities based on some very critical factors. So to make the land value model work, we needed to use CPOs, but we know we can't. To control the delivery, we needed a development corporation, and we haven't got one. We needed robust policy in Section 1, not in 2 years' time in a DPD when everyone's come in and speculatively developed on it. We haven't got that. Julie, Tina and Lee, you even refused to support putting this into the Section 1 policy, which is just disgraceful in my opinion. We said it was going to be infrastructure-led, but we're 10 million short on the link road, that there's no evidence that we need, with a HIF fund agreement that sets impossible conditions. We're already in trouble with Bewley Park and the HIF funding there. So, you know, if their golden child is out, I don't think this stands much chance of getting additional funding. We're claiming that a rapid transport system is going to be served by a bus on regular roads. But all of this has been delivered by ECC. Put your hands up if you're confident that ECC can deliver on time and on budget. And if we get this road, it's going to create a car-dependent community, additional congestion, air pollution, while things like schools and health centres are set to arrive 18 years into the build. That's not acceptable. Everything else, a list too long to go through, is at the discretion of developers. Social rented provision is below the percentage in our own policy. To refer to this as a garden community is deluded. It's not going to meet those principles, and we should stop calling it really. We had aspirations, we promised the public a better way, and what they're going to get is going to be a total disaster. So what does the plan give us? An end to speculative development? No, because you're not going to get a single house for the first 5 years, for at least 5 years, and that means that we don't deliver against our 5 years supply. So all of these speculative developments is going to happen anyway. We're going to drive our own numbers up from the 920 because we're over delivering. It's 113%. We don't need these houses. But you know, there are a lot of long-term problems we're not even considering, like the fact we've signed up to a climate emergency. Brexit is going to have a bit of an impact, and COVID. And yet we're committing this for the next 40 years. We have no idea what's the planet is going to be like then. But, you know, some of you sort of seem to think that the climate emergency is really important, and other developments, that's like really kind of top of your list. So are you going to stand by those principles tonight, or are you going to commit to this environmental tragedy? Because if you don't, you're going to be a hypocrite. Climate emergency stuff, we haven't done any work on carbon footprint, particulate and noise emissions, light pollution, wildlife, all of that stuff. ECs have confirmed they haven't even looked at it yet. But finally, I talk to Mark, Julie and Cyril. You represent Wivenhoe. You know that Wivenhoe residents are overwhelmingly opposed to this plan, and for good reasons. If you vote for it, you will betray those you claim to serve. They deserve better. Wivenhoe will not forgive you, and shame on you if you vote for it.
Oh, I was mute. Councillor Christopher Arnold, please.
Keep moving around the screen. Mr. Mayor, this is going to sound off topic, but it isn't, I promise you. Sometime in 1998, I was on the Planning and Transportation Committee. We had a local plan review going, as we always seem to have, and I was on the local plan panel as well. The chairman of the committee died in office and was replaced by one Terry Sutton, who I didn't really know. And Terry, by virtue of that office, also became the lead member on the local plan review process. So I got to know him. And what was very clear was that he was striving to achieve consensus, to bring together the problems that all members have in their ward. And actually, he led a process which was trying to deliver a local plan for Colchester. And it was he brought to the last meeting of that local plan panel, before we delivered the deposit draft for adoption by council, a sheet of paper on which every member, and they were the chairman, the vice chairman, and the group spokes of the Planning and Transportation Committee and the local and the Development Control Subcommittee, and Tony Webb for Tiptree, all 9 of us, and we signed the piece of paper. And the piece of paper became the first sheet of paper inside that deposit draft. And it represented not that we'd all agreed on everything that was in it, but that we all knew that we'd done our best to agree everything that was in it. And going to my group meeting or online last Monday, I was actually all set to vote for this. And I've been thinking more and more about the way Terry led us through that local plan process and set the style for plan processes that followed. And I looked at the gulf that remained, because the one we're dealing with tonight was not set by consensus. We find ourselves, as my group leader has pointed out, in a position not an enormous distance from where the Conservative group would have liked to have been, but with some significant parts of a plan which are not what might have been. And had it not been for the grandstanding of certain members, particularly cabinet members at the start, who are cabinet members no longer, and here I have to pay tribute to the present cabinet members who have done an enormous amount to close that gulf. Yeah, we might actually have been a lot closer. I thought very hard about this, but the challenge going forward for this council with Section 2 is to find somebody who can bring all the members together and deliver a Section 2 which actually does represent consensus in this council. This Section 1, cleared by the inspector, thankfully, gives us a chance now to turn to Section 2 and to do Section 2 and achieve consensus. But this plan does not represent consensus. Were I to vote for it, it might give the impression that I believed otherwise. And so, to the surprise of some of my group, I'm going to abstain on this one tonight. And I hope I've clearly explained why. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnold. Our next speaker is Councillor John Jones. You're muted, John.
My screen was going all over the place, Mr. Mayor. Fascinating start to a debate, but how the hell did we get here? And that's the main problem for me, really, is that consistently and regularly over the last more than 5 years, I've been saying, and my group have been saying, word for word, what Mr. Clues produced. And the concept of spending £483 million and no repayment until 2043. Anyone who had any business sense would have looked at this and said, what on earth is going on? Allied to that was the fact that we desperately needed Part B, Part 2, whatever you want to say, that should have been first. Because in this plan, more specific local policies. And not only that, we've lost appeals. Talking about you might lose, we have lost in my county division of Tiptree 200. And I did mention, I heard someone mention the name of Gladman. We've been wide open because we're 4 years too late in coming to our senses. And what I had to stop it irritating me is those people who scoffed and mocked at everything our group said. I clearly remember Councillor King's magnificently orotund rhetoric about gently telling me we were wrong and we should support this. I could name many others. I'll pick out actually as a good guy, Tim Young, who managed to make sure that we could save Mersey from sinking into the North Sea. And the thing is, we said this clearly and cogently, and I think without any, there was no malice. It was just saying, look, this does not stack up. This is what the inspector's going to say. I hate I told you so. And in a sense, we've got to the stage where we should have been 2 or 3 years ago. And then we could have, is part 2 to me, that is the really important part. What I'm really interested in though, is how did we get here? Who led us up this garden path? It's a bit of a pun. You know, someone has to be accountable for this because it's just a bureaucratic disaster. And again, my group said frequently, we need to get the villages and the rural sorted out. And allowing ourselves to go into a situation where we didn't have the statutory number of forward planning so that we could lose appeals. I mean, this whole thing is just ridiculous. I would like someone to acknowledge where we went wrong. I have asked at the policy panel that we should have a formal review into how on earth we have spent £1 million of Colchester ratepayers' money. We haven't stopped decisions making on appeal being passed. And, you know, we could have done this so much earlier. Now, having said that, I think that I could not oppose this. If we do, we are going to get to the stage where we lose the 920. And to me, we have to recoup the time we've lost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jowers. I'm afraid you've used your 3 minutes.
I didn't hear the bell count, Mr. Mayor.
No, it was right in my left ear.
Was it? Oh, they ring in that, not in mine. Anyway, just a final word, Mr. Mayor, is that I'm going to vote for this. And I know many in my group won't. They'll understand. But this is essential we get it through. So my view is, reluctantly, I'm going to vote for it.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Councillor Willits.
Mr. Mayor, can I answer some of those questions that Councillor Jowers was just asking? How did we get here? And I think the path how we got here is quite clear. This evening is the closing of a chapter in a tale of incompetence and ineptitude, a tale of how a bungling administration has failed to come up to the mark for the people of Colchester. Failed the people of Colchester on the critically important plan, which should have been ready in 2017. And here we are, 4 years later, we still haven't finished it. We were finally put out of our misery by Planning Inspector Clues, who took the grandiose vanity project and tore it to shreds. But if we look back, as Councillor Jowers was suggesting, it could have been so different. The strategy for part one, which is what we're discussing this evening, was reviewed by Lord Kerslake in 2016. He assembled a panel, Mr. Mayor, of the great and the good in the world of planning. And that reported to us several times with a formal report in January 2017. His panel were alarmed that the council was committing to delivering all 3 garden communities, new towns, or whatever we call them, to the same timescale, estimating peak debt of £500 million, £500 million, Mr. Mayor, and no net positive financial position for over 30 years. I mean, it's just incomprehensible. More sensibly, his panel suggested a strategy of try your hand at one of the smaller garden communities first and see how well you get on. And this was certainly the strategy which the Conservative group thought was a prudent way forward if we had to move forward on that basis. But the administration willfully ignored this sensible advice. It was a cabinet that had no experience at all in large-scale planning and contributed to the needless waste of £8 to £10 million of public funds across the board. And to that, Mr. Mayor, there has to be a day of reckoning. Lord Kerslake and his specialist team were convinced that Colchester Borough did not have sufficient resilient planning and delivery teams to manage even 2 garden community projects at the same time. His report mentioned the amazing complexity of the sustainability assessment with which we've had so much difficulty and the viability analysis. They highlighted the myriad of infrastructure dependencies and most of all the overambitious timetable for the local plan. And I think that just about answers Councillor Gowers, how did we get here? That's how we got here. But Mr. Mayor, this evening we are fortunate. Instead of the pontifications of the Lib Lab administration, which has got us nowhere in 3 years, we have a feasible 15-year local plan written for us by a government planning inspector. It captures the most salient and important issues. Housing numbers to be constrained to 920 per year.
Councillor Willits, I'm afraid you've had 3 minutes.
Yep.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, I think it's a magnificent achievement to get where we are today, thanks to the government planning inspector.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. Thank you. Councillor Liddy next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I speak as chair of the Planning Committee and to the value of the local plan and the work of the committee in managing the land resources within the borough. Over the past few years, CBC has used this new local plan to filter out speculative planning applications. If they fall within areas defined by the new local plan, they proceed to consideration by the committee, as they have previously been subject to a public consultation and a sustainability appraisal. If they do not, they are refused permission by the officers under delegated powers. Such a refusal can be defended on appeal. I should add that the 97 Barbrook Lane Tiptree appeal in 2020 was allowed as the inspector erroneously concluded that CBC could only demonstrate a 4.7-year land supply rather than a 5-year one. Since January 2019, some 130 applications for planning permission were refused as being outside the settlement boundary as defined by both plans. Of the 130, some 65 were for housing development. Most are minor developments that will do no harm than upset their immediate neighbours, but they do set a precedent, and even a single dwelling can be out of character, especially in a sensitive environment like Dedham Vale. Others are for substantial estates that could alter the character of their communities, particularly in rural wards. 97 Barbrook Lane, as well as Colchester Road, West Mersey and Peaks Close, Tiptree spring to mind. They're in almost every ward in the borough, particularly in communities where there is no adopted neighbourhood plan. If the new local plan is not adopted tonight, protection from speculative housing development will cease in 2023, and we do not have the time to prepare a new plan. The volume house builders will then be legally entitled to resubmit their original plans, which will be difficult to defend on appeal as there will be no local plan to defend. The new local plan is an essential tool in our management of land resources, and to discard it so easily will have dire consequences in an unpredictable world. The government may have shelved its proposed planning reforms for the time being, but they do remain firmly on its agenda. It is also worth pointing out that if the new local plan is not adopted tonight, it will undermine many years of hard work by colleagues from all political parties on the planning committee, as well as the officers supporting them. It will deprive the committee of the means to defend Colchester from speculative planning applications in a way that neighbouring authorities have been unable to do. So I urge all colleagues to put the interests of Colchester first and adopt this new local plan to provide some certainty for our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liddy. The next speaker is Councillor Gocher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What is being proposed in section 1 is not a garden settlement or a garden community or a garden village. It's a new town. And we cannot divorce this from what's happening across the whole country. Across the whole country, these things are being proposed. I read only yesterday that it could, if they all go ahead, reduce the non-urban environment by as much as 20%. In other words, the purpose of garden settlements, new towns as I call them, is to speed up the rate of development. It is to facilitate more development. Now, we all remember the new towns of the 1950s and 60s, Stevenage, Milton Keynes and so on, but times have changed since then. We are in a climate emergency, for example, and this development that is proposed goes with a new road, which will inevitably increase car use because there are no plans to outlaw car ownership on the new town. And it's pie in the sky to assume that without that, they will all cycle down the rapid transport system or use the bus and no one will have a car. Of course they will have cars. And you're concreting over acres of farmland. And at every acre you build on, that is less acreage that can be returned to meadows or rewilded. And 97% of our meadows have gone since the Second World War because you are decreasing the amount of land that we have to grow food on. So that makes it less likely that there'll be any rewilding of what's left. And we are in a climate emergency. And you have declared a climate emergency as a council. And you are now facilitating an increase in development over farmland. It is also allowing tendering to dump much of its growth on our border. So the new people there use our infrastructure. So that puts pressure on our infrastructure. So that's something that is raised with me a lot by people. But for me, the main concern is environmental. I cannot sit here and support what is essentially a plan for growth, because a climate emergency, it doesn't just mean that we deal with it by doing this, by doing this, by doing this. It's what we stop doing that counts as much as what we do. Because if we don't stop what we're doing in terms of the growth agenda, everything we do in terms of dealing with the climate emergency and the biodiversity emergency is simply mitigation, i.e. mitigating against the damage we are causing by carrying on as we always have done. And we've also heard how times are different with COVID. There is going to be more space in towns for housing because there's going to be less retail. There's going to be more people working from home. This will stay. And we know that the population increase has now started to go down as well.
Thank you, Councillor Gocher. That's 3 minutes. The next speaker, Councillor Dave Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you and good evening, everybody. Yes, a lot of debate. I've been listening very intently and wanted to salute, as other people have, past chairs of local planning committees and the portfolio holders for the work they've done on this. It is, Mr. Mayor, a local plan that if we do not pass, as has already been said, we move from the 920 to maybe 1612 a year. as suggested by the government. Not something I want to see, because not building, for example, those 920 means that we'll be punished for it. That investment of 99 million also for new transport can be used to best effect and make sure we serve that new community. And we increase affordable housing as well by 30%, which has got to be good, hasn't it? So I will be supporting the local plan as moved tonight. I want to finish off by saying a couple of things, really. Simply, I'm a fan, unlike other councillors who've already spoken, of planned development that brings infrastructure first, such as garden communities. It's the only way I know of doing it. I've got in my ward, Mr. Mayor, 3 or 4, maybe 5 estates that had been built with very little infrastructure bolted onto it. And other councillors will recognise what I've just said there, because in High Woods and other parts of town, that also happened. On the second thing I want to talk about and finish off before I talk at the end, Mr. Mayor, is in a very clinical way, talk about Middlewick site. It's already been mentioned tonight. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there's been a lot of mischievousness going on in social media about not having the local plan will stop Middlewick. Not true. It's not true. If you don't have Middlewick in the plan, like the local plan chairman decided, you would have had to say to the MOD, you cannot build here. Guess what the MOD would have done, Mr. Mayor? They would have either walked away. Is that likely? Ask yourself. No, they wouldn't. They would have perhaps challenged the local plan decision and came back and then challenged and made us put in 2,000, 3,000 more houses on Middlewick. Or they could have finally put in their own planning application, Mr. Mayor, for their own site on there and challenged that. And if we'd have refused that, as has happened in other planning applications on the planning committee, as you finally know, that planning inspector could have come down judging on a planning application by a government planning inspector, and I guess which way that would have gone. You can make your own decisions, but as far as I'm concerned, a planning inspector judging on an MOD government-led planning application, I think I know which would have happened. Whether that risk of 2,000 or more was worth that risk, no, it wasn't. So you had to, the local plan chairman and the local plan chairman had to do what they've done. So I'm going to be talking, finally, Mr. Chair, I'm going to continue with my take it off the table campaign to the MOD, and I've written to the MP about that, obviously, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. And of course, that site that you mentioned will be in part 2, and you'll have plenty of opportunity to speak later. Councillor Andrew Ellis next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a Conservative group spokesperson on the local plan committee, it should be with pleasure that I endorse this motion to adopt section 1, but I can't. Making a local plan should be a collaborative, not a combative process. Local plan committee has always been seen to be above petty town hall politics, because planning really shouldn't be political. Being part of shaping our borough is challenging. We have housing targets to meet, planning for associated and much needed infrastructure to service that housing, and a multitude of opinions from both public and experts to help guide decisions we make. But sadly, during this somewhat tortuous process, things went badly wrong. Following our first issues and options consultation, it became abundantly clear that the garden community magic bullet was nothing of the sort. The point of the consultation is to make positive use of the information fed back. We didn't, though God knows my group tried. Sadly, this has merely served to strengthen the perception that local government consultations are nothing more than a tick box exercise. And as a consequence, public trust has been eroded. People told us the Colchester Braintree Borders garden community wouldn't work. Experts told us it wouldn't work. In the peer review, Lord Kerslake and his team, as people have mentioned, told us it wouldn't work. And my group continually told this administration that it wouldn't work and challenged you to provide the evidence that it would. You couldn't do so. To all of this, effectively, you turned a deaf ear. And so finally, a planning inspector has had to tell you that it doesn't work. Nor does West of Braintree, but with modifications, Colchester Tendering Borders might do so. So this evening, it's a gutted and filleted section 1 that's set before us. Personally, and I stress this is a personal opinion, I believe that the Colchester Tendering Borders is too large. It has the makings of environmental disaster, and I have grave doubts that it will become the idyllic self-sustaining community we're being sold in the glossy brochures. Please prove me wrong, as my group leader has already said to you. Mr. Mayor, in a 3-minute speech, I haven't the time to scratch the surface of what went wrong with this plan, but what I can do, echoing Councillor Jowers, is publicly request an internal inquiry into it. This is essential if we're to learn lessons from this debacle, and it is a debacle, and to assure they're not repeated in our next plan review, which is only 5 odd years away. We simply can't afford to do anything else, given the eye-watering amounts of money that have been spent on this plan and the amounts of time that have been expended as well. It's disgraceful. This leaves me in an invidious position this evening. I can't personally vote for a plan which I feel, despite the removal of the Colchester Braintree Garden community, remains flawed and with considerable question marks over deliverability of East Colchester. I'll call it an urban extension, Councillor Gocher. After all, voting records remain long after speeches are forgotten. And yet I understand, as others have said, that voting against it would be to risk considerably higher housing targets than those locked into this plan. I'm therefore left with no choice this evening, frustratingly, other than to abstain from voting. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Corey, you're next, and I have 2 speakers remaining.
Thank you, Mayor. Voting for the plan tonight is the right answer, but I do believe the local plan system asked the wrong question. In the 21st century, with the climate and biodiversity crisis we're facing, we must change the way we approach development and growth. Doing development the old way, adding an odd estate here and there without infrastructure definitely won't work. The garden community principles go a good way to address these key issues and give us the opportunity to develop right. But they also risk being entangled in the same rigid parameters of the local plan system, which focuses on housing delivery and landowner-led searches. So one thing I do agree with the government on is looking at planning changes and reforming the local plan system. That involves how we engage with existing communities and moreover how we move away from the current system of searching for sites based on landowners and developers with options and land coming forward. It almost harks back to the feudal system. This can't be right. How will you deliver X thousands of houses, and on which landowner's patch will you deliver? These are the wrong questions to start with. So I commit to lobbying to change these wrong questions and these wrong starting points in the future. For now, we must face the realistic challenges in front of us and how we deliver the prepared plan and deliver strictly to garden community principles. We must work together as politicians. I understand the point about consensus, and the system hasn't helped us to get to this point. We need to do better. We need to work together with communities to make a different answer to development possible. We must review and continue to improve upon this plan in the next 5 years and beyond. The wrong answer, to not plan at all, would see developers walk all over our communities and develop on our borders without the principles or the infrastructure included. When taking on the local plan as leader, I've tried to reach out to the opposition in the chamber and local communities too, to find ways forward at local plan committees. It has proved to be quite an inflexible system. I supported colleagues to be critical friends and ensured that many briefings happened to improve understanding and involvement in the process. Essentially, I have found it pretty hard to improve a flawed system of local planning. I must state that this is not at all the fault of our dedicated planning officers, who I thank for tirelessly working over the years to get it here. As a ward councillor, I've worked to get the information out to my community and facilitate engagement. I've put forward concerns about the impact of the TCP settlement on our existing communities and will push for mitigations in a number of ways. For example, to ensure the garden community occurs only north of the A133, to provide real and protected buffer zones between Wivenhoe and with the Salary Brook slopes. Furthermore, I've pushed for gaps in the garden community plans to be tightened, to hold to the development principles that we talked about at the start, that infrastructure is delivered up front, that existing infrastructure is protected or improved. Along with pushing for better engagement with existing communities and seeing co-stewardship realised in order to tackle the concerns of communities like Wivenhoe. These are the right answers I must pursue to make this plan work. Having no plan is the wrong answer for our residents.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corey. When you started speaking, there were only 2 speakers left, but we have a list now of 6 or 7. So what I propose is that it's nearly 90 minutes. We will have a break for 6 minutes and come back at 7:30. That's 7 in case you're a bit late. So please switch your screens off and we'll see you in 7 minutes. Right, welcome back, councillors, and I hope the 7 minutes was long enough for you. Please turn your screens on so that I can see that you're alive still. And we'll carry on. We've got 7 speakers. Councillor Lewis Barber next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a binary choice this evening on outcomes, neither are particularly attractive, one being the approval of the East Colchester settlement and the other rejecting the plan outright. And this makes it a particularly difficult vote for me. I have no faith in this council whatsoever to deliver this plan because of its lacking in competence on pretty much everything. We've seen over the last few years that it's been gorging itself on taxpayer money for this project, ignoring the legitimate criticisms that many have had, and more looking forward to rubbing shoulders with senior civil servants in London and with ministers, rather than noticing that from 2016, the foundations locally were already collapsing underneath it. The most senior civil servant, ironically, Lord Kerslake, firing the first warning gun back in 2016, 2017. And it was clear for many of us to see at the early workshops that there were serious deficiencies in the plans. And I recognise that the inspector has legally passed or proposed that the plan can go forward. That doesn't mean it's the right plan for us. Committing to more housing than we need beyond this housing period, locking in that housing for decades to come. It argues that it'll be a self-sufficient, the administration argues to be a self-sufficient development, but already the main piece of infrastructure is being funded by the taxpayer, not like originally proposed by the development. It argues, the administration, that the development will be environmentally friendly, but it's car dependent and gobbles up hectares of grade A countryside. And we've also lost tens of millions of pounds of taxpayer money, both directly and, as Councillor Coate identified, through incalculable hours lost and the opportunity cost of doing something different in the borough that really could get people supportive of it and get behind them. So while I fear, well, I hope that I'm wrong, I fear that I will be right, because I and many colleagues have been right at every step of the way, most notably with our criticisms of West Hay, that has been completely pulled. The alternative this evening, as already identified by many speakers, is equally a disaster. And it's a disaster because of the years of delay that this administration has overseen. Rather than listening from the outset and taking forward our proposal of pausing the local plan, it rushed headlong into pushing its plans that it was ideologically and dogmatically wedded to. And now we respect this development because of the garden communities, when it was always argued that they would save it from us. Oh, the irony. Because back in 2016 and 17, that was what was thrown at us. Protect our existing communities. The administration said, well, now look at us battling against speculative developments in wards such as mine and elsewhere, Mersey, Tiptree, across the borough. We've just lost one in my ward because of the 5-year supply issue. That's because of the delays to the garden communities, not in spite of them. So that makes it difficult for me, because I can't support the no plan option now, because of the years of depletion of the 5-year supply means we'll be
That's time,
at risk,
Chairman.
as many have identified. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Lewis Barber. And the next speaker is Councillor Adam Fox.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Here we are at last, and I'd like to thank all those who've been involved as well. Officers, councillors, members of the public who have all contributed to this process. And of course, the planning inspector who's delivered to us a sound local plan. Section 1, of course, includes the garden community, but it also is about the number of houses we build, jobs, infrastructure, and increasing the target for affordable housing. We have a growing population. We will need homes for those young people who want to continue to live locally, and people who come to Colchester to make it their home. We know Colchester is an attractive place to live, rooted in history and culture with a modern outlook, access to the coast, to the city, to countryside, and to ports and airports, with a thriving university. It's why I call Colchester home. This local plan locks in a housing target of 920 for the next 5 years. New housing development for the future built to garden community principles, healthier homes and infrastructure first, an investment of £99 million for new transport, and increasing affordable housing to 30%. The alternative is no local plan and a free-for-all for development, with no say for Colchester's existing residents, for the speculative development that tendering are lauding that they will no longer be subject to. We all have our issues with the national planning system. There are things we agree with, there are things we would change. One of the challenges was the ambition of this plan and the constraints of the current planning system in planning for the much longer term, not just sites for the next 5 or 10 years, but the next 25 years. That's what the garden community aims to do. It enables us to plan in a new way that helps to reduce the impact on existing infrastructure. I appreciate the challenge. For those who question, I've never seen the garden community as a utopia, but a better way of delivering development and building communities that people want to live in. We've worked with our neighbouring authorities, and that's what so many people want from politics, for people to work together to make decisions, backed by administrations not just in Colchester, but in Braintree, Tendring, and at County Hall in Chelmsford. The vote tonight ultimately is not one between development and no development. It's a vote between a plan for development and no plan for development, and I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. Thank you very much, Councillor Fox. The next speaker is Councillor David King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, first of all, my thanks for so many being so frank. It does illustrate what I was told when I first joined your number, that more unites than divides, that members do look beyond politics, and that there are places, committees, panels, planning in particular, in the past at least, where we could work to a consensus, and that was so well described by Councillor Chris Arnold, and I thank him and others for giving their own sense of what should have happened and what did happen. I want to acknowledge, as several speakers have asked, that we, as we all should, that there is a big gulf between the intent when this ship sailed and what we now have, but it is what we have. I want to also acknowledge the efforts in opposition of a number of councillors at personal costs to look after their local interests, to fight for what they thought was right, even if that wasn't the efforts of the administration and our officers at that time, shaped as it was, let's acknowledge this, by government policy and government targets and government direction. I want to thank them, as do the campaigners they worked with, as well as our officers, for all they've done in such turbulent circumstances to get us to where we are today. It's a time to look forward, is all I would sort of say. Not to go around the loop again, exchange certainty for uncertainty, whether we'd like that certainty or not. The local plan we have in front of us reflects a positive, the power of consultation, of good governance, actually shaped by evidence and argument, and an inspector mired by many who gave due weight to all. It deserves support from us all, if not with passion, and clearly many have none for it, then for the sake of pragmatism to avoid what follows without a local plan. I do think that the differences we've had in here tonight, I hope that they are a watershed, that we can move to a better place. I welcome the active support of any. I welcome the presence of Councillor Dundas alongside Judy Young and I, as we try to represent the interests of the whole of the chamber. And that's a promise I made before, and I repeat again. We've got to, as Chris Arnold described, search for consensus. That was the past. I hope it will become the future again, and I'll do all I can to support that process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. The next speaker, Councillor Phil Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For me, this evening, we are being asked to make a decision to adopt Section 1 and proceed to examination of Section 2. And this will allow us to have a protecting and up-to-date local plan. We're not looking to apportion blame this evening. This is different. This way of developing is different. The benefits of this strategy far outweigh the negatives. It's a far better way to build the homes that we need for the future. This protects us from the speculative development and all the damage that they've done in the past to our current infrastructure. This is a better way to get infrastructure rather than begging, chasing and fighting for it later on. And Mile End is a big example of that. We've got some good infrastructure, but it was always chasing and begging and fighting for it. Just remember, we have over 40,000 under 19s currently living in this borough. That was taken in 2016. We may have even more young people in this borough. We have over 3,000 people on a house waiting list in this borough. This local plan, this adoption, gives those young people a chance of a house in the future. In my ward, we've had thousands of new homes on several developments, probably 3,000 in the last few years and more to come. They're not a disaster. Those developments are not a disaster. They're great communities with great people, just like in Monkwick, Wivenhoe, Newtown and other previous developments that were debated and built by councils over the years. So I will be supporting this motion as the alternatives are far worse. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. The next speaker is Councillor Roger Buston.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Listening to the debate tonight, and I have been listening with some close attention, I wondered on a number of occasions whether or not I was still listening to the alumni meeting of the Cabinet just last week. Sadly, it seems to me, yet again, that ABC is the order of the day. In other words, anyone but a Conservative. In other words, we want cooperation and everyone's views, and that applies providing you agree with the administration. Well, sadly, we don't, and that's part of the basis of listening to other people and accepting constructive criticism. And we're only here now because, unfortunately, the administration didn't. As a result of last week's Cabinet meeting, I couldn't help but go away with the distinct view, and this is only as a lawyer, that Colchester Borough Council are looking down the barrel of judicial review from Essex County Council. Unbelievable, I've never seen this in all the years I've been a councillor. But this situation seems to me to have all the mile marks of exactly the same sort of justification. However, moving to the case in point, nonetheless, I do find myself here still in a quandary. I'm not happy with this plan, notwithstanding Mr. Clues' professional and very helpful comments as a broad brush. He said this as a professional. Nonetheless, the fact remains it's effectively, in regard to most of it, what our group said 3 years before, but we've wasted 3 years plus by not being listened to. Therefore, the plan I see is a bit of a curate's egg. There are some good bits to it. However, I'm not happy with the detail in particular of the Tendring Borders proposed garden community. And I have a great deal of sympathy, considerable sympathy, in fact, with what Councillor Luxford Vaughan's insightful presentation actually said. Well done for saying that. I think it needed to be said, and it was right that you do. So what should we do? Councillor Barlow, sadly, I have to suggest, is probably right. The results of refusing this plan would be a far worse situation created than approving it. That's no reason, members, friends, colleagues, to actually vote for it. However, nonetheless, I still cannot support it, but although I cannot support it, I cannot vote against it. Therefore, as Councillor Arnold, I fear I will have to abstain. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buston. Councillor Tina Bourne next. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, fellow councillors. I don't think on my time on the council there's ever been anything so bad-tempered in its decision-making process. And I don't just mean tonight, I mean over a period of time. I don't think any of us have done ourselves any favours over the years in debating anything to do with the local plan. We've had, I can't think of anything else that has generated so many reports, so many meetings, so many briefings, so much contact from the public in their contributions in writing and in person. Particularly, I remember some of those local plan meetings where we had to move to the Moot Hall because there were so many members of the public wanting to have their say, which is brilliant. But it has been very bad-tempered. And I think as we move forward now, Mr. Mayor, and I hope you will agree, that there has to be a better way of making decisions and getting on with things that are really, really serious for the people in our borough. I hope that the government changes its ideas on their national planning and development processes, because a lot of it has not been fit for purpose. We've been trying to fit into the national guidance rather than letting ourselves develop something that is more suitable for our borough. And before the next plan, I hope that that can take place, or we have a new government, because I can't see how this kind of planning process is actually fit for purpose at all. Like I say, garden communities is the only way of developing and delivering a large development space. The local plan is not all about garden communities. There's plenty of it in there that is excluding the garden community. And that's also what we need to get on with. I really look forward to moving on to section 2 of this local plan. And I really look forward to hearing what Councillor Dundas said about working with the administration in order to make it work. Because if we don't make it work, then everyone will have failed, and we will have failed the people of Colchester. And it's easy to say we are where we are, and it's fine for people not to agree, but it's not fine to scupper the process going forward. Once the vote has been taken, we all need to get on board and make it work for those people that need homes, not houses, for those people that need extra space in which to live in, for those people's well-being who are working at home now and their whole working environment has completely changed. We know that we've got people who want to live and work and take their leisure time in Colchester, and we can all make it a better place, Mr. Mayor. So I will be supporting this adoption of the local plan. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, Councillor Vaughan. Next speaker is Councillor Martin Goss.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. I just wanted to speak in support of us adopting part 1 of the local plan. It's been a really long journey, but finally we have an agreed and approved plan from the inspector, who has thoroughly and robustly reviewed this, and many people have had their chance to have their say. In Colchester, we've built on average 830 houses for 40 years, and when you tell residents that, they can be quite astounded, but that can be tracked back in history. We need to ensure that we give long-term stability to planning in this town. We need to ensure that we don't have speculative development through the back door that has started to happen through the appeals process. By adopting this tonight, we put a stop to that before we get to part 2 of the plan. We also need to ensure that this approach delivers us infrastructure, true infrastructure, which includes roads, transport, community centres, open space, cycle routes, safe and green pedestrian links, along with schools, world-class NHS facilities. The approach that councillors need to take once this is adopted, particularly over in East Colchester, probably needs to mirror my own approach, because many of you will recall I voted against the local plan because it affected Mile End. Just like Councillor Scott Boothell did over in Stanway, because Stanway also was affected. They're now being built. These communities are now here. So what we now do is I change it from being a dissenter, and I now call myself a community maker, where we work with the developers to ensure that we get every single thing we can out of them, and we work to welcome existing residents who are moving, because over 70% of the people buying houses in Mile End are from Colchester and some from Mile End, and therefore it is about welcoming, building communities, and doing everything you can to ensure you get the best for your part of Colchester.
Good. Thank you very much, Councillor Goss. Next speaker is Councillor Pauline Hazel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I find it a tad ingenuous of this Liberal Democrat Labour Council actually blaming the government for the position we find ourselves in. I have never in the past heard them fight shy of criticising or calling the government to account when it suited them. But actually why I wanted to speak tonight, it's listening to all the speakers, and it brought back memories. I went to Poundbury with the council team to look at the development there that Prince Charles brought about. And what struck me then was the leader then of the NEGC. Every time he spoke, it was, we will, we are going, we will. This was in quite early days of this, of all these thoughts of garden communities. And yet it said to me, their mind was already made up. Fast forward a little bit to some of the public consultations. I remember one particularly in Marks Tay, and it was the same sort of thing. He was not interested in any way of really addressing properly the number of residents who had serious concerns about these plans. And I thought then nothing has changed, and nothing has changed. We hear Councillor Corey saying his difficulty at trying to engage the Conservatives. Well, I'm sorry, the Conservatives have longed to be engaged, and we gave our points of view, and they were all turned down. I am very worried going forward that this administration will be able to carry these plans through to a really successful outcome, and I will be abstaining on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hazel. Councillor Nigel Chapman next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be very brief. I just really need to explain the reasons for my vote in due course. This is something of a dilemma, really, and I've been listening to the debate carefully to see if it helps me resolve the decision I'm going to make. I've heard many comments from the members of my group about what's happened. I have some sympathy with some of those comments. I also hear the way that things have been done in the past, which obviously I do recall, and again have some sympathies with what's said with that. However, I've got to make up my mind on what we have before us today. On the one hand, we have, frankly, what I think is a Hobson's choice decision to make. This plan has to go through, frankly, to keep us to the 920 and to reject speculative development. But on the other hand, I do have grave concerns that are increasing, actually, about the impact of the garden community on the east of Colchester, especially, if I may say so, on the ward that I represent, Rural North. The ripple effect of recent developments in tendering has been of problems to us in our communities along there, particularly traffic issues and that sort of thing. And I just feel that we need to have some more reassurance as to how those are going to be managed as tendering develops, comes closer to our borders. And I have some sympathy, I think, therefore, with I think it was Councillor Oxford who also made some similar comments. So I think there are issues there that lead me really to reach the conclusion that I shall also be abstaining on the vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. And finally, we have Councillor Scott Woodhill.
Thank you. You'll be pleased to know that I'm going to keep this really short. I won't go my full 3 minutes. In fact, I'm sort of talking bullet points. And these bullet points are coming along just by listening to everybody, what everybody's had to say. I mean, the first point is Section 1 has been found sound by the inspector. The second point is we are meeting the individual build-up rate targets set by government. I like the idea of infrastructure first. I think it's so important. Stanway has suffered for the lack of infrastructure, and I've had to lobby for infrastructure to support the cumulative development that Stanway's taken. This has not been delivered to date. It's coming, but not yet. And speculative development has already started in the emerging plan. Things that are not in the local plan have been approved because of the weight given to it, because it's in the emerging plan. And I'm having to work hard to mitigate against that and get the best we can for our residents on that. So I just wanted to put forward the thoughts that I've had from listening to the full debate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Scott-Hill. I'd like to invite Councillor Barlow to speak for up to 3 minutes and sum up that debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really not sure how one can sum up that debate in 3 minutes, or even, we've had 2 hours or something at this point. So I'll just speak briefly, firstly to thank all the councillors who've taken part in this debate. We've had a very wide range of views represented. We've had a lot of opinions, a lot of information put forward, and I think it's been useful for us in actually having all those views put out there. Like I said, I don't think it's possible to summate everything that's come out of this debate. What I would say is there have been important points raised about how we move forward after this process. I think whoever follows me in the role of local plan chair will still have a lot of work to do, just in dealing with the ramifications of this local plan, but also, as we've seen already, kind of aptly today, we've already had notification of another consultation on changes in the planning system coming through, and that's been raised by several councillors, notably the leader, that we are working within a national framework, and as that is constantly changing, that's constantly changing what we can and can't do, and I think we need to be aware of that and stress that as an important point. But we said it is important that we do move forward and that we do look at finding ways we can work together and carry on with this. And so just to conclude, I would like to thank everyone for having had their say, having contributed to this debate, and please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barlow. It's been an interesting debate and a lot of impassioned speeches. I'd like to now invite our monitoring officer, Mr. Weavers, to take the vote.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So we're voting on motion A, that the recommendation contained in draft minute 205 of the local plan committee meeting of the 14th of December 2020 be approved and adopted. Councillor Arnold.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Barber.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Barlow.
For.
For. Councillor Barton.
For.
For. Councillor Bentley.
Abstain.
Sorry, say again.
Abstain.
Abstain. Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
For.
For. Councillor Buston.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Chapman.
Abstain. Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Chillingworth.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Chua.
For.
For. Councillor Coleman.
For.
For. Councillor Cope.
For.
For. Councillor Corey.
For.
For. Councillor Crowe.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Dundas.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Elliott.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Ellis.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Fox.
For.
For. Councillor Gocher.
Against.
Against. Councillor Goss.
For.
For. Councillor Harris.
For.
For. Councillor Hayter.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Hazel.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Higgins.
For.
For. Councillor Hogg.
For.
For. Councillor Jarvis.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Jowers.
For.
For. Councillor King.
For.
For. Councillor Liddy.
For.
For. Councillor Lilly.
For.
For. Councillor Lissimore.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Loveland.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Luxford Vaughan.
Against.
Against. Councillor Fiona McLean.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Jackie McLean.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor McCarthy.
For.
For. Councillor Moore.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Beverley Oxford.
For.
For. Councillor Gerard Oxford.
For.
For. Councillor Pearson.
For.
For. Councillor Scordis.
For.
For. Councillor Scott Butell.
For.
For. Councillor Warnes.
For.
For. Councillor Whitehead.
For.
For. Councillor Willits.
4.
4. Councillor Wood.
4.
4. Councillor Julie Young.
4.
4. The Deputy Mayor.
4.
4. And the Mayor.
4.
4. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the result of the vote is 29 voting for, 2 against, and 18 abstentions. The motion is carried. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weavers. That concludes the business for tonight. We now move on to part 2 of the local plan in due course. So thank you for your attendance and your input tonight, and I wish you a belated Happy New Year, and more importantly, a healthy one. Good night.
Good night, ma'am.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Matt.
Good night,